are not allowed to enter in order to document. The same is not true for Morocco proper, but in Western Sahara it's completely shut down. And you say that the first casualty of war and occupation, it is the truth, because you target the journalist, and that is true for Western Sahara. And Khatri was arrested for this specific reason. He was arrested because he was a very young journalist when he was arrested. He was working as a photographer in Smara city. He managed to document and capture footage of police violence, which reached the international stage. It reached the international media. And in that way, Khatri managed to capture footage of a truth that Morocco do not want to be shared with the outside world. And for that very reason, he was arrested, and for that very reason, he was in prison and sentenced to 20 years in prison. And I remember back when he was arrested, we were shocked by the fact that he was arrested, because he was very young at the time. He was an emerging activist, and he was all of a sudden taken to Laayoune without us understanding why he was arrested. And he was very quickly brought in front of a court and sentenced to 20 years. And when that prison sentence fell, it was like a ripple of fear going out into the Sahrawi journalist society, but also in the community in general. It was a signal that if you dare to do the same as what Khatri Dada was doing, meaning trying to capture human rights violations on tape and share it with the outside world, this is the punishment you will receive. So with this decision, we got a UN opinion stating that the arrest and the imprisonment of Khatri is illegal. It is in violation of the right to a fair trial, which Khatri didn't receive, and which then also requests the immediate release of Khatri. And as Khaled was mentioning, that Morocco is using every tool in the toolbox to try to discredit these journalists and portray them as criminals and terrorists, and that they're not in fact journalists and not in fact human rights activists. And with such an opinion, you get a legal document that says, no, the detention is illegal, but you also get a legal document that says, we believe you. We know that you are a journalist. We know that you are a political prisoner. We know that your detention is illegal and that you're not a criminal. And that is also a victory in itself. I think that the decision is now it's a final win for Khatri, but it's also a case because of the prison sentence, because of the background for his arrest, because of the fact that he had done hunger strike in prison. He was placed in isolation. He vanished for us during short time periods. It also led to the detention of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, who have followed the case of Khatri Dada very, very closely and included his case in 3 different communications, but also in her press release. And she has used the case of Khatri Dada as an emblematic case of how journalists and human rights defenders are being arrested and tortured, and how Morocco is using this as tools in order to silence the voices of activists, and how Morocco is then punishing them not only at the time of their arrest, but by also giving them very, very harsh prison sentences, meaning 20 years in prison, and also punishing them whilst they are in prison with inhumane prison conditions, racial discrimination, and arbitrary deprivation of rights. And I think the case of Khatri, it has also received already received a lot of attention, and the opinion from the working group is the final win for Khatri, and it is my hope that Morocco listens to the opinion, and especially now as it is the president of the Human Rights Council. And I agree with Edith, it's completely unbelievable that Morocco have this position, but it also means that Morocco has to respect these decisions, because already in the press release of Mary Laylor, which was before Morocco got the presidency, it was back in 2022, Mary Laylor said that if these allegations are confirmed, They fly in the face of Morocco's commitment to the UN system as a whole. And with this decision, it's now confirmed. It's flying in the face of the commitment of Morocco, and we need to hold Morocco accountable. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tuna, for the work that you have done and you're still doing for the Sahrawi political prisoners. And we all know, as Sahrawi people, that you were advisor for many other Sahrawi political prisoners and journalists. Could you share, please, any insights into the specific legal challenges faced by these individuals in seeking justice and advocating for their rights within the United Nations mechanisms?
Yes, I think the challenges are first and foremost at the local level for the Sahrawi journalists and human rights defenders that are imprisoned, because they are placed in front of a court that is not independent and not impartial. It's a political trial. There are political prisoners. They will not get justice in a Moroccan court. So the only avenue they have and that they can turn to is the international mechanisms. And they make the international mechanism so much more important. But the challenges with the international mechanisms, and although the UN has rendered several opinions holding Morocco in violation, both for torture allegations, but also on arbitrary detention and persecution of human rights defenders, the UN system and the international mechanisms that we have, they don't have enforcement mechanisms. They cannot enforce the decision. They cannot force Morocco to actually respect the decisions that are rendered. And that is the main issue that we're facing. In terms of legal avenues, they have to turn to the international mechanisms. We have strong opinions holding Morocco in violation. But even though we have all of these legal opinions and the legal documentation of the persecution, Morocco is allowed to continue to ignore the decisions. The UN doesn't have the enforcement mechanisms, and you're completely dependent on political pressure and pressure from international organizations in order to enforce these decisions. And that is often where the problem lies, because many countries are reluctant to openly and publicly denounce Morocco's human rights violations and to denounce the fact that Morocco is not respecting the decisions. And there is where we have to push, because the documentation we have, and now it's time for Morocco to actually implement the decisions. But if I can also elaborate a little bit on the documentation we have on Sahrawi journalists, I would love to, because, you know, when we started working together, it was, I think it was 2017, maybe, very closely with Equid Media, and we started to work on how to document the persecution of journalists, turning back to the crucial point that in times of occupation, the first victim is the truth. And in order to receive the truth, you need reliable sources on the ground. And these are the journalists. And that is where Morocco is going. That is where Morocco is targeting. Exactly. So we started to work on trying to document why Morocco is persecuting journalists and the situation of journalists. In your case, Nasai, was one of the most important cases we had, because it symbolized how the very profession of being a Sahrawi journalist has been criminalized by Morocco. So just by being a Sahrawi journalist, you're in breach of local legislation, and Morocco is persecuting you with threats of arresting you, which is what they did in your case. So it documents the very fact that just to be a Sahrawi journalist is de facto illegal when you live under occupation by Morocco. And then you, of course, have the other decisions from the UN Working Group, which also